Rome, 4th century AD. A distinguished senator stands on the wide balcony of his luxurious marble villa on the outskirts of the capital. His gaze sweeps over the manicured olive groves, exquisite mosaics, and armies of slaves that support this majestic monument to success. On his paper are figures representing the ownership of thousands of acres of fertile land throughout the empire. He considers himself the master of fate, whose wealth is engraved in the very foundations of the eternal city. A few kilometers away, an ordinary peasant tends a small patch of land near his modest stone house. He has no marble columns, but he has a well with clean water, a few sacks of grain, and survival skills passed down from his grandfather. Today the senator is a symbol of prosperity. But in just a few years, when the noose of Emperor Diocletian tightens around the empire's neck, this same senator will be ready to give up his villa for nothing, just to get rid of the obligation to pay taxes on it that no crop can cover. The peasant will stay where he is because his property was not a burden, it was a tool. Most of you today consider real estate to be your main asset, the final refuge of capital in times of storm. You are convinced that walls are a fortress. We are beginning this economic autopsy to shatter the illusion of security and show you how your home is becoming the perfect instrument of your financial destruction. There is knowledge that costs less today than a cup of coffee in the city center, but in the year 2026 it will be worth more than the entire gold reserve of your country. It is knowledge about how the institutional dependence of real estate works and how to distinguish productive land from concrete ballast. But before we reveal the mechanics of this trap, you should ask yourself one tough, almost cruel question. Do you really believe that owning an object whose coordinates the state knows to the centimeter and which cannot be moved is safe in a world where the fiat experiment is approaching its finale? Write in the comments right now whether you would consider your real estate an asset if tomorrow the tax on it increased tenfold and the banking system stopped issuing loans for its purchase. Are you ready to admit that your apartment is just a derivative asset, dependent on the stability of a system that is already showing signs of terminal pathology? This is not just a question of investment, it is the forensic handwriting of history that we saw in Rome, in Weimar, and in modern Venezuela. Your house is not a fortress, it is an immovable target. But here is the part that no one tells you about in the glossy investment magazines. Real estate is the least liquid asset in the world, and that's what makes it the perfect prey for governments on the brink of bankruptcy. When the national debt crosses $315 trillion and the sounding board about economic stability can no longer hide the reality, the system starts looking for where the real wealth is left. Gold can be hidden, Bitcoin can be carried in memory, but real estate is always there. It's registered in government registries, it's connected to government networks, and it's the perfect vehicle for redistributing wealth. In 2026, we'll see real estate go from being an asset to a liability. Think about that for a moment before we go any further. We do economic autopsies here, so you don't become the next anonymous case in the middle-class collapse report. If you feel like your confidence in the future is starting to conflict with the obvious facts, subscribe to this channel. We examine the forensic evidence of how institutions are eating away at the capital of those who have trusted the system for too long. Subscribe if you're ready to see the truth that most people ignore while you still have time to reshape your portfolio. Let's take a look inside the autopsies of the Roman economy. Why do we keep coming back to Rome? Because they've already gone all the way. When the empire was facing unsustainable military and bureaucratic costs, and the silver denarius had been devalued to the level of a copper coin, the emperors introduced a system of taxation based on land ownership. Taxes were levied not on actual income, but on the potential income of the land. You might not have a crop, you might not have slaves to till the fields, but you had to pay. Land ownership became not a privilege but a sentence. Large landowners began to abandon their estates and flee to the forests, or become colonists, virtually serfs, only to shift the responsibility for taxes to someone else. This is the pathology of real estate in the age of collapse, when an asset becomes a noose because of its visibility and institutional attachment. The forensic handwriting of history remains unchanged. In 1923, in the Weimar Republic, when the mark was dying at a rate of 1,000,000% a month, the government introduced a special property tax to siphon wealth from those who owned the walls. It was called the inflation tax. The state decided that because your mortgage debt had depreciated, you had become richer, and you had to give that imaginary profit to the government. This is wealth redistribution at its purest. Think about it. You can pay off your mortgage for the price of a box of matches, but the next day the government will give you a tax bill that will make you lose your house anyway. The system never loses at the games it created. This is something that will never be written about in economics textbooks, but real estate is a derivative asset of the stability of civilization. It has value only as long as the sewers work, as long as there is electricity in the socket, as long as the police patrol the streets, and as long as you can defend your property rights in court. But all of these are institutional services that require funding. When the fiat experiment ends with the collapse of the currency, the funding for these services disappears. Your luxury penthouse on the 40th floor turns into concrete ballast the very moment the elevator and the water pump stop working. Without energy autonomy and security, your real estate is just a pile of rocks for which you continue to be legally responsible. In the year 2026, we will face a phenomenon that we call energy eviction. The cost of maintaining modern real estate is growing exponentially, along with the lack of information about future energy prices. Most homes built in the last 30 years have a critical institutional dependency on centralized grids. They are not anti-fragile. They cannot autonomously provide their occupants with heat, water, and food. When the price of gas and electricity exceeds your ability to pay, your home will start to eat into your equity faster than inflation eats into your savings. You will be forced to sell, but there will be no one to buy because everyone will be in the same trap. But here's the part that no one tells you about. Real estate is a fixed target for debt-based foreclosures. We see large investment corporations buying up housing all over the world. This is not an accident. This is preparation for a world where private ownership will become too expensive for the middle class. The system wants you to move from owning to renting. When you rent, you are completely dependent. You are the perfect object for social control. The tax loophole of 2026 is a mechanism for laundering capital remnants from the hands of private individuals into the hands of large institutional players. Consider this forensic fact. In Argentina in 2001, during the collapse of the peso, real estate prices in dollars fell by 70% in a year. Those who considered their apartments a gold reserve saw their capital evaporate, while taxes and utility bills remained. People were forced to abandon their homes because the cost of maintaining them exceeded the market price. This is the reality of collapse. What was an asset in times of cheap money becomes a toxic waste in times of scarcity. How do you distinguish productive land from concrete ballast? This is the main question of our autopsy. Productive land has existential leverage. It is land that can feed you without the involvement of complex logistical supply chains. It is land that has its own water source, the ability to heat itself, and the ability to grow calories. Productive land is an anti-fragile asset. It does not depend on whether the bank server in New York is working today. Concrete ballast is everything else. These are apartments in megacities, cottages in elite villages without the infrastructure of survival, office buildings in centers that are emptying. All of these are derivatives of fiat prosperity, and they will go down first. History has left us lessons written in the blood of those who held on too tightly to their walls. In 4th century Rome, the richest people in the empire tried to transfer their lands to the church or to the great magnates in exchange for protection and the right to simply live on this land so as not to have to deal with tax inspectors. They chose slavery over ownership. This sounds absurd until you understand the mathematics of tax pressure in an era of system degradation. When the state apparatus is trying to save itself, it will stop at nothing. Your house is its bank vault, the key to which is held by the government. In 2026, we will see the introduction of new environmental taxes and certifications. It will be a sophisticated form of confiscation. If your home does not meet new, impossible energy efficiency standards, you will be forced to pay fines that exceed the cost of rent. This is the tax loophole. You may think that you owe nothing to anyone because you have paid off your mortgage, but you will always owe the government for the very right to own real estate. And in times of great redistribution of wealth, this debt will become an instrument of your dispossession. Think about this very seriously. We are approaching a point where liquidity will become the most important resource. The ability to move your capital, your family, and yourself quickly is what true freedom is. Real estate is the antithesis of mobility. It is an anchor that keeps you in the impact zone when the alarm bells give way to the roar of destruction. Are you ready to go down with your concrete capital, or will you start converting it into anti-fragile forms of ownership today? The goal of our autopsy is not to make you sell everything and go live in a tent. The goal is to make you aware of the risks and stop considering real estate as an unconditional asset. Look at the structure of your assets through the scalpel of an analyst. What percentage of your capital is locked up in a liquid concrete? What part of your property has a critical institutional dependency? If the world fragmented tomorrow, could your home become your autonomous base, or would it become your main enemy, sucking up the last resources? The history of Rome teaches us that only those villas that were economically self-sufficient survived. Those that had their own forges, their own mills, their own sources of energy and food. They became the seeds of a new medieval order. The modern equivalent of such villas is not houses with swimming pools. They are properties with energy independence, fertile soil, and access to water. This is what we call productive land. Everything else is the scenery of a fiat experiment that will be dismantled during the great digital reset. But here's the part that no one tells you about. The government knows that you are afraid of inflation, and it uses real estate as a carrot to keep you in the system. They tell you buy a house, it always goes up in value, but they don't tell you that it only goes up in paper wrappers, which depreciate even faster. In real terms, in gold, in energy, in calories, real estate in many parts of the world has long since lost its value. It is this lack of information that creates the illusion of wealth for those who are actually getting poorer every year. The forensic record of history shows that before the final collapse, any system becomes extremely aggressive towards its internal resources. Real estate is the easiest prey. It cannot escape. It cannot be encrypted. It cannot be transferred anonymously. It is the perfect object for control. In the year 2026, you will see how the right to private property becomes increasingly conditional, burdened with dozens of social and environmental obligations. Think about this for a moment before we finish. It's not the strongest or the richest that survive. It's the most adaptable that survive. Anti-fragility is the ability to benefit from chaos, or at least not be destroyed by it. Real estate, in its classic modern sense, is the embodiment of fragility. It's a bet that the future will be the same as the past. It's a bet that institutions will always deliver on their promises. But we're doing these economic autopsies so you can see institutions are just facades that are the first to collapse. What can you do today? First, stop buying concrete ballast. If you have extra meters that don't generate real income and are highly institutionally dependent, get rid of them while the market still shows signs of life. Second, invest in productive land. Look for assets that have their own utility outside of urban grids. Third, reduce your institutional dependency. Every solar panel, every well, every ancient seed stock is a step toward freedom. As we wrap up this autopsy, the tax loop of 2026 is already tightening. The noise of a booming housing market is just a way to trap the last buyers before the big crash. History has already ruled what cannot be protected in chaos does not belong to you. It belongs to the system. Be vigilant. Don't let the bricks and mortar become the grave of your capital. We will continue our investigation in future autopsies, where we will delve even deeper into the mechanics of how entire asset classes disappear and what is left in their place. Remember, wealth is not what you have on paper. Wealth is what you have left when the paper loses its power. Your security is your personal responsibility. Don't become a statistic. Become an actor who understands the forensic script of history and acts before others. See you at the next autopsy. Take care of yourself and your real capital.